Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. It's me again. I mean, who else would it be? Anyway, today we're comparing Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom again, and we're looking specifically at how each game handles the exploration aspect of the game. Now, this is a weird way of comparing Breath and Tears. Tears may have a much larger world than Breath once you add in the sky islands and the caves and the depths, but this is partially because it could reuse a lot of assets from Breath, namely the majority of the overworld. So comparison gets tricky. Do we analyze just what Tears of the Kingdom added to the world and compare that to Breath of the Wild's overworld, or do we look at it as a whole? And we'll also have to look at how Tears' added mechanics change how you approach travel and exploration in the first place, and also look at any mechanics that influence travel that were removed in Tears, and the differences in how quests work changes how you explore. And so this is going to be a big mess. I'm going to start with gameplay aspects that change how you travel, just because it's the most straightforward thing and my brain's already melting a little with the potential scale of this comparison. Okay, but also before any of that, I need to get my pet peeve out of the way. I have a problem with the regional towers in Tears of the Kingdom. In each game, locating and reaching towers is a key aspect of the exploration process, as they give you a direction to go, and once you reach them, you get a map of the surrounding region. Anyway, I don't like the regional towers in Tears of the Kingdom. I just don't like them. They are, in my opinion, a complete and thorough downgrade in every way that should be yeeted into the mud, never to be seen again. Scaling Breath of the Wild's towers had a sense of finality for me. I would see a distant Sheikah tower and blaze a trail to get to it, fight or stealth through whatever enemies stood in my way, and scale the almost alien-looking tower to get the regional map. Each tower had this own kind of mini arc of trying to get that map that culminated with a perilous climb. Not to mention that the tower's aesthetic was strange and unfamiliar, but was also colored in mild, light browns, keeping them from becoming eyesores. And then in Tears, we have these wooden thrown-together monstrosities. They're either trivially easy to get into, or you have to find some cave to ascend into them, or sometimes there's some mini side quest you need to finish before unlocking a tower, but it's always something trivial and forgetful. And don't get me started on the cutscene. Breath of the Wild's tower cutscenes, when you get the map, are a little long, at about 45 seconds once you add in the wait time for the rune distillation. Tears of the Kingdom's tower activation and initial launch takes 70 seconds. But it's not the length that bugs me. The music and landscape view in Breath of the Wild's tower cutscenes are a handsome reward for a task well performed. Tears of the Kingdom's tower cutscene, by comparison, feels like a pointless drag. You're so far above the clouds you barely even see anything. And you better believe me, when I got to that lookout landing tower right at the beginning of the game, I took the time to find a way to tediously climb up on top of a tower that was clearly not meant to be climbed, only to find nothing. And I was still salty that I didn't have my paraglider yet, so that experience may have tainted my view of these towers, but let's move on from my personal problems with Tears' exploration to the actual discussion. Breath of the Wild has a massive world that takes a lot of time to traverse. To make the task funner and more manageable, the game provides you with the option of taming one or more horses, and later on you may acquire the champion's ability that I have taken to calling the annoying Birdman's Gale. Both of these speed up travel quite a bit and are fun and useful tools. Tears keeps horses, but throws out the annoying Birdman's Gale for the Wind Sage ability. While convenient in the Sky Islands, this wind ability doesn't have time to speed you up much on the ground or in the depths unless you take the time to get yourself up high, and lacks the sheer utility of the Gale. Tears adds in a new mechanic, however, that can potentially speed up travel a lot. Ultra Hand allows for the creation of many different things in Tears, but the one that matters here is vehicles. Whether it's merely a simple flying machine to gain some height, or if it's a massive land crawler that can tackle difficult terrain over long distances, there is a huge amount of utility that comes with the Ultra Hand ability. And here's where we're going to get into some hot takes from yours truly, because I don't like Ultra Hand. Okay, allow me to explain. First of all, building a vehicle, particularly before acquiring schematics, is time consuming. It also requires you to spend materials, which in turn means you need to spend more time collecting more materials, and at the end of the day, most vehicles aren't even that fast. The faster vehicles usually use rockets, and the rockets expire after about 0.5 seconds. In the end, this usually means that building a vehicle to get you from point A to point B doesn't gain you any time. because you're losing so much in building and gathering materials. In a lot of scenarios, it might actually be losing you time. What building vehicles does do, however, is make travel more fun. Building a hot air balloon is more interesting for a lot of players than spending 2 or 3 minutes climbing a cliff. The problem with this is that, at least for some players, myself included, building a hot air balloon or a helicopter or a car or a tank isn't what we signed up for when we sat down to play Zelda. When I find myself in a scenario where Ultra Hand seems to be the intended way forward, I find myself looking for another solution. Crafting and using these vehicles, at least for me, usually feels like a mini game that I have to complete before I can get back to playing Zelda again. Also, vehicles kind of killed horses. If you like vehicles, odds are you never use a horse. I'm sure some of you are an exception to this. There is, after all, a horse and carriage mechanic in this game, but I'm talking as a general principle. Now, this is more of a side issue for me because I didn't find myself using horses much in the first place, even in Breath of the Wild, but part of the appeal of getting a horse wasn't that it was fast, it was because it was cool. And what's cooler than taming a horse? Building an Apache attack helicopter. No wonder there's rewards for visiting stables now, because if there wasn't, most of us would never bother to stop by them in the first place. I'm not saying that Ultra Hand and building in tiers is bad, far from it. It is a unique direction to go for the game that I don't think anyone was expecting. But with regards to exploration, I feel that it is a horizontal movement in quality rather than a vertical one. Or for those of you who flunked out of geometry class, vehicles aren't an inherently better or worse way to travel than what we already had. They're just a different approach, and just like the horses found in both games, they're an approach that some people really like and that some people almost forget or even avoid. Also, everyone misses the annoying Birdman scale. Seriously, Nintendo, if there's ever a Master Mode DLC for Tears like there was for Breath, please put it back in the game in some form or other. It's just so much fun. Okay. With mechanics out of the way, let's look at the actual environments and worlds in which these games take place. And now that I've had time to think about this, wow, Breath of the Wild did so much right. I find that Breath of the Wild has a very strong sense of emotionality in its world, and by extension in its exploration. The vastness of Hyrule makes you feel tiny, and the sparse, ruined, yet beautiful kingdom perfectly portrays the sad and lonely, but still hopeful mood that permeates the entire game. The intermittent and halting music adds to this as well. The atmosphere in Breath is, no pun intended, breathtaking. I think that Tears of the Kingdom lacks this. There's not a strong sense of any particular emotion or feeling as you play through it the way there is in Breath. It feels, by comparison, jumbled and confused, trying to incorporate too many ideas at once to the point where no one thing shines out. Between the carryover material from the prior game, packing the overworld almost to overflowed with content, and the fact that they added in 2 very different layers of the world to traverse, I just never got a good sense of how it was supposed to feel to play this game. Going to the depths or the Sky Islands almost felt like playing a different game for a little while. Many of you may have noticed this as well, and it is detrimental to the appeal of exploration in Tears of the Kingdom. If Breath of the Wild is like serving a good meatloaf, Tears of the Kingdom is a massive pile of ground beef casserole. It's still good, and there's definitely more of it, but by comparison to the prior, it's all jumbled up and has less appeal. Breath of the Wild's environment is better than Tears at setting the game's tone. Okay, hot take over for now. Let's look at the additions that Tears of the Kingdom actually makes. From an exploration standpoint, Tears of the Kingdom basically adds 3 things. 1 is the Sky Islands, 2 is the caves found throughout the overworld, and 3 is the depths. These cooperatively more than double Hyrule's traversable landmass, meaning that there is much more to explore. But are these additional regions as high quality as the overworld that was already in Breath of the Wild? Well, it's complicated. So let's briefly look at the 3 additions separately. Number 1 is the Sky Islands. Now, despite my previous stated qualm with both the Sky Islands and the depths, I like a lot of things about the islands. Namely, their great aesthetic, their unique enemies like the flux constructs, and the fact that they're basically mini packages of gameplay content. Whichever archipelago you find yourself in, there is guaranteed to be something to do, whether it's solving a puzzle, completing a shrine quest, or beating a mini-boss. There's always something to do up there. The thing is, though, as I stated in my last video, The Sky Islands are in the sky, and the sky is mostly made of sky. That's why they're called Sky Islands. What I mean is that while the Sky Islands are packed with stuff to do, there's not that many islands, there's not that much landmass up there, so they actually make up a very small portion of the game. From an exploration point of view, because remember, this is still an analysis of exploration within these games, you can end up spending more time trying to figure out how to get into an archipelago than the amount of time you actually spend up there. So Sky Islands are good, but there's not that many of them, and they're pretty small. So they make up a very tiny portion of this whole exploration thing. Number 2 is the surface world caves, and the wells, I guess, but those are really short, and I don't recall there ever being anything more valuable or worthwhile than gems in them, so I'm gonna do Tears of the King a favor a moment and pretend that the wells don't exist. They're mostly kind of pointless, except for that one side quest. I don't know how much area of the map the caves take up, because there's not a surface level caves map layer, but I would reckon they are comparable to the Sky Islands. I know a lot of people like the caves, but I ended up ignoring most of them because most have, at best, maybe a shrine and a few weapons or other loot. Look, I know there's a couple of them that have good stuff in them, but for the most part I just ignored them because at my skill level, which at the time was still really low, it's not worth fighting through Horriblins and Gloomhands for one shrine or for a weapon that'll break within 10 minutes anyway. I'm not saying caves are bad, I'm saying I lack the experience with caves to make a fair analysis because I rarely feel inspired to do them anyway, because they just don't strike me as that remarkable. Okay, moving on. Number 3 is the depths. This is the largest added section to explore in Tears of the Kingdom, and in some ways it's pretty good. It's got the darkness mechanic that makes you take it at a more slow, methodical pace, and you can refight some bosses down here too, that's cool. And it's got a lot of clothes, so there's a reason to come down here. Okay, the depths kind of sucks. It's not awful, and in many other games I'd say it's pretty cool, but compared to the surface world that we have had ever since Breath of the Wild 6 years ago, the depths is barren, empty, and uninspired. The environment is uniform across almost the entire realm, except for Death Mountain. That area is pretty cool. So exploring most of the depths all feels the same. The enemies are mostly just reskinned versions of overworld enemies, and the depths are poorly integrated into the main plot, giving you very little reason to explore down there. And apart from getting some new clothes, there's very little reward for exploring down there. Don't get me wrong, I've explored it. I think I've found over half the light routes at this point, and I will continue to do so, but in almost every regard, the exploration in the depths is drastically inferior to the exploration in the overworld. And the overworld is mostly just reused assets, so for anyone playing this after Breath of the Wild who wanted a fresh world to explore, I'm sorry, you're out of luck. Now, this was maybe a little harsh, but I had to get that out of my system. Now there's one other thing that changed quite a bit between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom when it came to exploring, and that's how quests are set up. In Breath of the Wild, most quests had markers on the map to show you where you're supposed to head in order to complete the quest. Not all of them did, as a lot of quests leave the pin on the character that gave you the quest, and some quests have no pin at all. But a lot of them have a map pin that shows you where you're supposed to go. More importantly, all the main quests, apart from the memories, have pins. This makes it fairly easy to play the game straightforwardly if you want to. In other words, the game doesn't force you to explore if it's not your thing. It is an open world game, so it's kind of assumed that most people who are playing want to do some exploring, but some people want to do more, some people want to do less, and it's nice that the game doesn't force you. You'll have enough points of light with the quest markers to play the game without getting all the Sheikah Towers or exploring every corner of the map. The degree to which you explore is up to you. In Tears of the Kingdom, you'll still see all this. There are quests with pins at their quest location, quests with pins on the quest giver, and quests with no pin at all. That much hasn't changed. The difference is the proportions. The number of quests without pins at the quest locations is higher in Tears of the Kingdom. Far more often, you have to figure out for yourself where you're supposed to go based on the dialogue associated with the quest and the quest description in the game's menus. And for side quests, I'm kind of okay with that. But this is also the case for main quests. After beating the 4 main temples, the quest to find the 5th sage has no marker, with few leads to show you where to go. This forces you to either do a lot of thinking and figure out where you're supposed to go for yourself, or if you can't figure it out, you'll have to wait on that quest until you happen to stumble across it, and that's a main quest. Now, this kind of change could push you in either direction, because the question of which method of presenting quests is better is mostly a matter of preference. There are genuine and impactful merits to both that change the game both within the context of exploration and for each game as a whole. I prefer how Breath of the Wild handles this aspect of the game, but that's because I like having the option of playing the game in a straightforward manner if I want to, for at least the main quest. I don't like having to look up how to complete quests if I get genuinely stuck. It drives me nuts and it feels like cheating, but because of how Tears set up some of their quests, that's what I was stuck doing sometimes. It's either that or forced exploration, which in this case would have meant forced retreading of previously explored areas over and over again until I find whatever obscure area or NPC I needed to continue the game. I totally get the appeal of having to find your own way. I would totally understand if someone preferred Tears of the Kingdom's management of quests and how they impact the exploration in the game, but I think for audiences as a whole, it's better if, at least for the main quest, you have the option to play straightforwardly. Okay, so summary is hard for this topic, but we'll try. First of all, the game mechanics for exploring, such as the addition of vehicles, have changed a fair bit between these two games, but not necessarily for the better or for the worse. It does add more tools to the toolbox though, so overall that's probably a positive. Quests have changed, but in a way that is potentially more polarizing for different kinds of players. On a less neutral note, Breath of the Wild's world evokes the same emotional beats as the game's story, while Tears of the Kingdom does not. And while Tears of the Kingdom has about the same overworld in addition to the new regions to explore, the new regions aren't as interesting or fun as the overworld that we already had. So in many regards, the games are equal, but while Tears of the Kingdom is bigger, it's not necessarily better. The best exploration to be had in either of these games is found in Breath of the Wild. Once again, I have to clarify that I'm not saying that Tears of the Kingdom is a bad game. If anything, I think this just stands as a testimony to how good Breath of the Wild still is, despite its flaws. There's a reason that it was so influential in gaming for so long. It was and remains a masterpiece. And Tears is a great game too. It's a masterpiece in its own right, and in some aspects it is definitely better than Breath of the Wild. But when it comes to exploration, Breath is the better game. Probably. Like I said, some of these aspects are purely a matter of preference.